She slowly turned around. Standing only a few feet away was Ms. Evelyn Whitmore. "Megan, if you ever see a job opening at my company, don't even think about applying." Rachel Collins laughed into her phone as she leaned back in her chair during lunch. "I'm serious. My boss is the most wicked woman I've ever met. She treats employees like we're nothing. She never smiles, never says thank you, and honestly, I don't think she has a heart." A few coworkers nearby looked over, then one of them laughed. "She's talking about Ms. Evelyn Whitmore." Another shook his head. "That woman scares everyone." Within seconds, almost the entire cafeteria was listening. Someone called out, "Tell your friend how she made Tom cry during a meeting." Room burst into laughter. Rachel smiled. "Oh, that's nothing," she said. "If she could replace every one of us with robots, she probably would. I don't think she's ever cared about another human being." More laughter echoed through the room. "So why does anyone still work there?" Megan asked over the phone. Rachel smirked. "Because jobs are hard to find. Otherwise, everyone would leave. Nobody deserves a boss like her." Then, the laughter stopped, not gradually, instantly, one by one, smiles disappeared. The room became so quiet you could hear the air conditioner humming above them. Rachel frowned. "Hello? Megan, are you still there?" No one answered. Instead, every pair of eyes was fixed on something behind her. She slowly turned around. Standing only a few feet away was Ms. Evelyn Whitmore. She hadn't interrupted. She hadn't said a word. No one knew how long she had been standing there, but judging by the tears slowly forming in her eyes, she had heard enough. No one moved. No one breathed. Rachel opened her mouth to apologize, but before a single word came out, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore quietly lowered her head, turned around, and walked away without saying a single word. "Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy powerful emotional stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our upcoming stories." Rachel stood frozen. She had expected anger. She had expected to be fired. But tears. Why would the woman everyone called Heartless walk away crying? And why did it suddenly feel as though everyone in that room had judged someone they never truly knew? What happened next would leave the entire office speechless. The silence in the cafeteria didn't end when Ms. Evelyn Whitmore walked away. It followed everyone back to their desks. Rachel Collins couldn't shake the image of the tears she had seen. It didn't make sense. The woman everyone feared wasn't supposed to cry. Even the employees who had laughed the loudest moments earlier now avoided looking at one another. The office suddenly felt different. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew whether Ms. Evelyn Whitmore would return, or whether Rachel had just talked herself out of a job. For years, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore had ruled the company with quiet authority. At 40, she was always the first to arrive and often the last to leave. Every suit she wore was perfectly pressed. Every meeting started exactly on time. She never smiled, never joked, never attended office parties. Most employees had worked there for years without ever hearing her say something as simple as, "Good morning." She rarely spoke unless business required it, and when she did, every word was brief, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. To most employees, she was a mystery they had stopped trying to figure out. Over time, the office had given her names she never knew about. The Ice Queen, the Wicked Boss, the Robot, the Woman Without a Heart. New employees heard those nicknames before they even learned where the break room was. People avoided eye contact whenever she walked past. Nobody wanted to be called into her office. One meeting with Ms. Evelyn Whitmore was enough to make even experienced managers nervous. Whenever the elevator doors opened and she stepped out, conversations ended almost instantly. The rumors never stopped. Some said she was divorced. Others claimed she hated people. A few insisted she cared about nothing except money. There was even a story that she had once disciplined an employee for arriving just 3 minutes late. Whether those stories were true didn't matter anymore. After years of being repeated, they became the truth everyone believed. But after what Rachel had just witnessed, for the very first time, everyone in that office began asking themselves the same question. Had they spent years judging a woman they never really knew, and before anyone could answer it, another moment was about to change everything. The rest of the afternoon felt unusually quiet. The laughter that had filled the cafeteria was gone, replaced by whispers that stopped the moment someone walked by. Rachel Collins sat at her desk staring at her computer screen, but she hadn't typed a single word in nearly 10 minutes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore standing silently behind her, tears rolling down her face before walking away without saying a word. It didn't make sense. She had expected anger. She had expected shouting. She had even prepared herself to be fired. But tears? That was the one reaction no one in the office had seen coming. The next morning, the office felt different. Employees spoke in whispers if they spoke at all. Even Emma and Lisa, who usually found something to laugh about, seemed unusually quiet. Every time the elevator doors opened, people instinctively looked up, wondering if Ms. Evelyn Whitmore would finally address what had happened in the cafeteria. But she never appeared. The silence was becoming more frightening than any confrontation. Rachel tried to convince herself that maybe it was over. Maybe Ms. Evelyn Whitmore had chosen to forget everything then. The office intercom suddenly crackled to life. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Rachel Collins. The receptionist's voice echoed across the office. "Ms. Evelyn Whitmore would like to see you in her office." Room froze. Emma slowly lowered the file she was holding. Lisa's eyes widened. Someone whispered, "She's done for." Rachel felt every eye in the office following her. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She slowly stood up, smoothed her jacket, and took one step toward the executive floor, then another, and another. No one returned to work. They simply watched her disappear down the long hallway. The heavy wooden door to Ms. Evelyn Whitmore's office stood slightly open. Rachel stopped just outside. She took one deep breath, raised her trembling hand, and gently knocked from inside. A calm voice finally broke the silence. "Come in, Rachel." Rachel slowly reached for the doorknob, completely unaware that the conversation waiting behind that door would change not only her life, but the entire office forever. Rachel Collins stood outside the executive office, staring at the polished wooden door. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain anyone standing nearby could hear it. She took one slow breath before gently knocking. "Come in." Voice was calm, nothing like the voice Rachel had imagined all night. She slowly stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind her. The office was silent. Every file was perfectly arranged. Every chair was neatly positioned. The only sound was the steady ticking of a clock hanging on the wall. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore stood beside the large window with her back turned, looking out across the city. She didn't ask Rachel to explain. She didn't mention the cafeteria. She didn't even look at her. Several long seconds passed. Rachel could barely stand the silence. Finally, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore spoke. "Please, have a seat." Rachel hesitated before sitting down. She had spent the entire night preparing herself for one sentence. Fired. But those words never came instead. Another long silence filled the room. Then Ms. Evelyn Whitmore quietly asked, "Rachel, when you said yesterday that no one could ever love someone like me," she paused. "Did you truly believe that?" Rachel felt her throat tighten. Just 24 hours earlier, she would have answered without thinking. Now, she couldn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't thinking." The first time, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore slowly turned around. There was no anger on her face, no resentment. Only a sadness so deep that Rachel could hardly bear to look into her eyes, without another word. She walked toward her desk, opened the top drawer, reached inside, and carefully removed an old photograph. Its edges were worn, its colors had faded with time. She held it gently, almost as if she were afraid it might fall apart in her hands. The room grew completely still then. She slowly placed the photograph on the desk, and gently slid it toward Rachel. Rachel lowered her eyes, the moment she saw the picture. Expression changed. She looked back at Ms. Evelyn Whitmore in complete disbelief. She struggled to find the words. "I don't understand." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Ms. Evelyn Whitmore looked down at the photograph one last time. A tear slipped quietly down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She simply took a slow, trembling breath and said, "There's a reason I never tell anyone about my past." She closed her eyes for a brief moment. When people only know the ending, they assume they know the whole story. She opened her eyes again, looked directly at Rachel, and for the first time in 20 years, she made the decision to tell someone the truth, a truth she had spent 2 decades trying to bury, a truth that would change everything Rachel Collins thought she knew about the woman everyone called the Ice Queen, the wicked boss, the robot, the woman without a heart. It was a story that didn't begin in a boardroom or inside a corner office. It began 20 years earlier, when Evelyn Whitmore was simply a young woman whose biggest dream was to build a happy life with the people she loved. The photograph rested quietly between them. Rachel Collins couldn't stop looking at it. She had walked into Ms. Evelyn Whitmore's office expecting to lose her job. Instead, she was watching the strongest woman she had ever known struggle to hold back tears. For a long moment, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore said nothing. Then she gently ran her fingers across the faded photograph. Rachel, have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined they could be the one to break you? Rachel couldn't answer. She simply listened. A faint smile appeared on Ms. Evelyn Whitmore's face. Man in this picture is David Sullivan. I truly believed he was the greatest blessing God had ever given me. Didn't have much money. Didn't need much. Had dreams. We had each other. When our daughter, Sophia, was born, I honestly believed our little family would last forever. She stopped speaking. Her smile slowly disappeared. But people rarely change all at once. Happens little by little. So slowly, you don't notice until the person standing in front of you is no longer the one you married. Rachel sat perfectly still. First time David came home after midnight, he apologized. Believed him. The second time. Barely looked at me. The third time. Didn't come home at all. The room fell silent. I kept making excuses for him. I told myself he was under pressure. I told myself business was demanding. I told myself everything would be fine. Then she closed her eyes. One rainy afternoon, I picked up his jacket from the sofa. Something slipped out of the pocket and landed on the floor. It wasn't his wallet. It wasn't his keys. It was another phone. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. I stared at it for several minutes. I should have walked away. I wish I had. Her voice became almost a whisper. It only took one message, one photograph. One woman's name. In that moment, my marriage ended. Rachel lowered her eyes. She could almost feel the pain in Evelyn's voice. I confronted David that night. I prayed he would tell me there had been a mistake. Didn't, looked me in the eyes, and admitted everything. Another silence filled the office. He said he had fallen in love with someone else. Rachel felt tears gathering in her own eyes. I begged him to stay. For me, for Sophia. Walked upstairs. Kissed our daughter while she slept. Picked up his suitcase. Walked out of our lives. A mess. Evelyn Whitmore looked down at the photograph again. I thought that was the hardest day of my life. She slowly shook her head. I had no idea life was about to become much crueler. She took a slow, trembling breath. 3 weeks later, little Sophia collapsed in my arms. Office became completely silent. Rachel's heart sank. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore looked out the window, her voice barely above a whisper. That was the day I learned. Some heartbreaks are only the beginning. Rachel had never imagined that the next chapter of Evelyn Whitmore's life would be even more devastating than the one she had just lived through. Rachel Collins sat frozen, unable to move. Everything she thought she knew about Ms. Evelyn Whitmore had been shattered inside that office. The woman she had spent months calling Heartless had just revealed a pain she had carried in complete silence. Before Rachel could say another word, a phone suddenly rang. The sharp sound cut through the room like a knife. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore looked down at the screen in an instant. The calm expression on her face disappeared. Rachel watched the color drain from her face. Her hands began to tremble. She answered immediately. Hello, for several seconds. She said nothing, she simply listened. Then in a voice Rachel could barely hear, she whispered, please, tell me she's all right. Another pause. Rachel's heart began racing finally. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore closed her eyes and quietly said, I'm coming right now. The call ended. She quickly grabbed her coat, picked up her handbag, and hurried toward the door. As she reached it, she stopped for just a moment. Without turning around, she softly said, Rachel, thank you for listening. Then she walked out. Rachel remained standing in the office, unable to understand what had just happened. Only minutes later, the news spread through the building. Employees watched through the office windows as Ms. Evelyn Whitmore rushed across the parking lot and drove away faster than anyone had ever seen. Emma frowned. Where is she going? Lisa looked at Rachel. What happened in that office? Rachel hesitated. I can't explain it. We've been wrong about her. The words hung in the air. For years. No one had ever heard anyone defend Ms. Evelyn Whitmore, not even once. Curiosity quickly spread through the office. Unable to ignore the questions racing through their minds, Rachel, Emma, Lisa, and a few other employees quietly left the building and followed from a distance. Nearly 40 minutes later, they watched Ms. Evelyn Whitmore's car pull into the parking lot of a hospital. No one spoke. They simply followed, inside. She hurried through the corridors as if she had walked them hundreds of times before. She finally stopped outside one private room for a brief moment. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, then gently pushed the door open. Rachel looked through the small window, and what she saw didn't seem possible. The feared CEO, the woman they called the Ice Queen, was sitting beside a hospital bed. She reached over, carefully brushed a strand of hair away from a young woman's face, then gently held her hand. No meetings. No deadlines, no cold expression, only a mother. Silently praying beside her daughter, Rachel felt tears gathering in her eyes. Emma covered her mouth. Lisa stood completely speechless for the first time. They realized that after every long meeting, after every late evening, after every exhausting day at the office, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore hadn't been going home. She had been coming here every single day. None of them knew how long she had been carrying this burden. None of them knew what had happened to Sophia. And none of them understood why Ms. Evelyn Whitmore had chosen to suffer alone. But standing in that quiet hospital corridor, one thing became painfully clear. The woman they had spent years judging had been fighting a battle no one had ever bothered to see. And the truth Rachel was about to discover would leave the entire office wishing they could take back every cruel word they had ever spoken. Rachel Collins stood frozen outside the hospital room. No one said a word. Inside, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore never let go of Sophia's hand. It was as though she believed that if she held on tightly enough, nothing in the world could take her daughter away. The room remained silent then. A gentle knock echoed through the doorway. A doctor walked in carrying a medical file. Behind him stood two nurses. The moment they saw Ms. Evelyn Whitmore, both smiled warmly. Rachel noticed something unusual. They didn't greet her like a patient. They greeted her like family. The doctor looked at Sophia, then back at Ms. Evelyn Whitmore. A gentle smile spread across his face. "Ms. Whitmore. Been waiting a long time to tell you this." She slowly stood, her hands trembled for a moment. She looked afraid to hope. The doctor opened the file after months of tests, countless evaluations, and endless waiting. He finally looked into her eyes and said, "Sophia has officially been approved for the life-saving procedure." Silence, the words seemed too beautiful to believe. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore stood completely still then, without warning. She covered her face. Years of strength, years of sleepless nights, years of silent suffering, finally broke free. She wept not because she was weak, but because, for the first time in years, hope had returned. She reached for Sophia's hand, held it tightly, and through her tears whispered, "We're going to keep fighting." Outside the room, Rachel felt tears running down her face. Emma quietly wiped her eyes. Lisa covered her mouth, unable to stop crying. The woman they had feared for so long was simply a mother praying for another chance. One of the nurses quietly stepped into the hallway. She noticed the employees standing there. "You work with Ms. Whitmore, don't you?" Rachel nodded. The nurse smiled gently. "She never missed a single day." Rachel frowned. "What do you mean?" It didn't matter if she had important meetings, if she looked exhausted, if the weather was terrible. Always came. Another nurse joined them, and every visit ended the same way. Rachel looked at her. The nurse smiled softly. "She always asked us one thing. Please don't tell anyone from my company that I'm here. They already have enough to worry about." The hallway fell silent. Rachel lowered her head. Emma could no longer stop crying. Lisa leaned against the wall, ashamed of every cruel joke she had ever laughed at for years. They had called her the Ice Queen, the wicked boss, the robot. The woman without a heart, but standing outside that hospital room. They finally understood. They had never been working for a heartless woman. They had been working for a mother who had hidden her tears, buried her pain, and carried a burden so heavy that no one had ever stopped to ask if she was all right. Rachel closed her eyes. One painful truth echoed through her mind. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones suffering in complete silence. As the employees slowly turned to leave the hospital, each of them carried the same unbearable weight, not guilt for fearing Ms. Evelyn Whitmore, but regret. Regret for never trying to understand the woman behind the title. None of them knew it yet, but the following morning, the entire office would make a decision that would leave Ms. Evelyn Whitmore speechless and remind her that kindness, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of finding its way home. Monday morning arrived, but something had changed. The office that was once filled with whispered gossip, cruel jokes, and quiet laughter had fallen completely silent. No one rushed to the coffee machine to talk about Ms. Evelyn Whitmore. No one laughed at the nicknames they had once proudly given her for the first time. Everyone walked through those doors carrying the same feeling, regret. Rachel Collins looked around the office. The silence said more than words ever could. Emma walked in carrying a bouquet of fresh white lilies. Lisa held a small envelope against her chest without discussing it, without anyone giving instructions. The employees quietly gathered outside Ms. Evelyn Whitmore's office, one by one. They stepped inside. Rachel gently placed the flowers on the center of the desk. Lisa carefully laid the envelope beside them. No signature, no long explanation, just a single handwritten message. "We're sorry we judged what we never understood." Nothing more. nothing less. Employees quietly returned to their desks. No one knew how Ms. Evelyn Whitmore would react. A few moments later, the office door slowly opened, as always. She arrived exactly on time. Her expression remained calm. She placed her handbag on the desk. Then, she noticed the flowers. She stopped. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the envelope. The office became so quiet. Even the ticking of the clock seemed louder than before. She picked up the card, read it once, then read it again for several long seconds. She simply stood there. A single tear rolled gently down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't look around to see who was watching for the first time in years. The smile everyone believed had disappeared forever quietly returned. It wasn't the smile of a powerful CEO. It wasn't the smile of someone celebrating success. It was the smile of a mother, a survivor, a woman who had carried unbearable pain for years, finally realizing she no longer had to carry it alone. Rachel slowly stood. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I judged you without knowing your story." Emma lowered her head. "We all did." Lisa nodded through tears. "We saw your strength, but we never saw your pain." One after another, the employees quietly apologized. No excuses, no long speeches, just honest regret. Ms. Evelyn Whitmore looked around the room, at Rachel, at Emma, at Lisa, at every face that had once feared her. She didn't remind them of the names they had called her. She didn't make them feel guilty. She didn't say a single word instead. She simply smiled, a quiet, gentle, grateful smile. Then she gave a small nod. It was all she needed to say, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words in that moment. No one saw the Ice Queen, the wicked boss, the robot, or the woman without a heart. They saw Evelyn Whitmore, a devoted mother, an extraordinary leader, a woman who refused to give up, even when life seemed determined to take everything from her. And perhaps that's the lesson hidden inside this story. Sometimes, the strongest people are carrying the heaviest burdens. Not every quiet person is cold. Not every strict leader is cruel. And not every story is what it first appears to be. Before judging someone, take a moment to wonder what they may be fighting when no one else is watching, because the kindness you choose to show today could be the very thing someone desperately needs tomorrow. Have you ever misjudged someone before learning what they were going through? Share your story in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear it. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to EduRivers, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story that reminds us to look beyond first impressions. Because sometimes, one phone call doesn't just change a life. It changes the way we see another human being. Forever. The end.